Across your core subjects and 3 elective subjects, you'll be encouraged to ask lots of questions, speak in front of others, work in groups, and develop the skills you need to succeed at university. You'll come to love these subjects, and they are so valuable in helping you build critical thinking skills and confidence that you can use, not only in your studies at the University of Melbourne, but for the rest of your life.
You have core subjects that everyone takes, and then you have elective subjects that you can choose depending on what it is you're interested in. Elective subjects, obviously, I picked the ones I was interested in, so I really enjoyed those ones. But even with the core ones, they were really engaging because they were new, and you got to learn a lot of things that you might not have already known. It was a really good experience, yeah.
The Foundation Studies program at Trinity is overseen and approved by the University of Melbourne, so you know you're getting a high-quality education that will set you up for your future. So join Trinity College today, your pathway to the University of Melbourne.
And a very good afternoon to everyone who's joined us for today's live lecture. We've got a fantastic lecture lined up for you tonight. Boy, this is going to be a highlight of this live lecture series. To those students who are joining us once again in the series, welcome back. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, glad to have you here. You're in for a real treat tonight. Tonight, we've got environment, development, and design. Okay, and we're in for a real treat because not only are we going to hear from our lecturer in charge, lecturer Jane Sykes, but also we're going to hear from some Trinity College students who have done the Foundation Studies program at Trinity College, who have gone on to the University of Melbourne, finished their bachelor degrees in environments and design, and are now working all around the world in areas of design, architecture, urban planning. What an exciting lecture we've got lined up for you. Of course, we want to hear your comments as usual. Put these into the chat. If you want to comment on any of the content that you're going to hear, put it into the chat. If you've got any other questions related to applications, entry requirements, scholarships, when to apply, University of Melbourne, or any other questions, put these into the Q&A. My colleague James, who's with us every week, he's behind the scenes and will be answering your questions. We've got a lot to get through tonight. I'm going to introduce to you now our speakers for tonight. Firstly, Jane Sykes, great to have you along. Students, I'm going to hand over to you now, Jane. So enjoy the lecture tonight. Q&A at the end, as always. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm delighted to be here with you all this evening, talking about an area that I'm very passionate about, and that is sustainability. Lovely that you could all join us here this evening. I'm particularly thrilled about tonight's lecture because we have, as Ben mentioned, a wonderful panel of amazing young people who I have had the pleasure of working with at Trinity College some years ago now. So as Ben alluded to, all of these amazing people were graduates of the Trinity College Foundation Studies program and are also graduates of the University of Melbourne. And they all actually studied the Bachelor of Environments course. Now, you might say, I didn't actually know University of Melbourne had a Bachelor of Environments course. Well, that's because there isn't one. There used to be. And these amazing young people were some of the last graduates of this particular course. Now we have, of course, the Bachelor of Design program. So that has now replaced the Bachelor of Environments. So I'm absolutely thrilled this evening to welcome our panelists today. And they are Derek Lim. Derek is located, hi Derek. Derek is located in Melbourne currently and works in the area of urban planning. We also have Sat Dine Ung. Sat is also located in Melbourne currently and works in the building and construction industry. And last but by no means least, we have Marika Hall, who is currently located in Japan and works in the real estate sector. So thank you all so much for giving up your time this evening to share a little bit about your work experience and how sustainability relates to your particular field. So we will hear from those panelists very shortly. So this evening, we're going to just begin by looking briefly at what the concept of sustainability and sustainable development is, and why this is so important now than ever before. We'll also briefly touch on why this concept is so important in particular for cities. Of course, the three panelists that we have this evening all work in urban areas, and cities is a large focus of their work. And then I'm going to call upon each of the panelists to share a little bit about how sustainability is relevant in their particular field. So first of all, as Ben said, I'm the subject leader for a subject called Environment Development and Design. Now, this subject has sustainability as its central and core theme. And really everything that we study in this subject comes back to this particular theme. So in this subject, we study some of the world's greatest global challenges, such as poverty, climate change or the enhanced greenhouse effect, the global water crisis, urban growth, sustainable cities, etc. And we also look at the design solutions that can help to address some of these challenges. So design solutions such as the use of renewable energy, of designing buildings to be energy and water efficient, etc. So as I said, everything that we study in this subject really is looked at through the lens of sustainability. So what does sustainability actually mean, and what is sustainable development? Now, I'm sure you are familiar with this very commonly used definition, which comes from the United Nations, which defines sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, to me, that definition really means making sure that every single person in the world today, and also in the future, can lead a reasonably good quality of life. Now, if that's going to happen, of course, that means we have to be really, really careful about the environment, look after the environment and protect our resource base. Now, you may be familiar also that sustainability is often talked about in relation to the three pillars of sustainability, or the three themes, if you like. And they are economic development, environmental protection, and social equity. Now, this diagram, it's quite important that the central pillar in this diagram is the environment. And actually, I would go as far as to argue that the environment is the most important of these three pillars, because really everything we do is 100% dependent on the environment. So why is this concept so important now more than ever before in human history? Well, one of the key reasons, obviously, is because of population growth. We have an unprecedented population growth, bigger population than ever before. I wonder whether you can actually tell me what our current global population is. I wonder whether anyone can quickly type it into the chat there. 7 billion, not quite, a little bit higher, 7.7, we're almost there. 8 billion is too high, 7.8 is almost there. In fact, we are 7.9 billion. Yes, Vivian, you got it. 7.9 billion currently. And if we continue at this current rate of growth, then by 2050, we are expected to reach between how many billion? Type it into the chat once again, 2050, expected to be around, yes, Hamish, thank you, between 9 and 10 billion people. Now that's more people than ever before. And of course, every one of those people needs resources for their basic survival. And so with our increasing demand for resources, of course, comes increasing production of waste. Now, the increasing demand of resources is not just because of increasing population, but also as our standard of living grows, which of course is a good thing, that means our resource consumption increases. So increasing demand and use of resources, increasing production of waste. Now, it's essential then that we learn how to lead a comfortable life with using less resources and being more careful with our waste and trying to reduce our production of waste. So it's more important now than ever before that we try to lead a sustainable life. And I think we have the capacity to do that. We're coming up with some amazing design solutions, and some of our panelists will talk about those this evening to enable us to work towards a sustainable future. Now, cities. Why should cities in particular be places that are sustainable? Well, again, I'd just like to share a few key statistics with you. So currently, 56% of the global population live in cities, and we're on track by 2050 to have at least 68, even some sources say 70 or more of the global population living in cities. So we are becoming an increasingly urbanized world. Now, cities only take up 3% of the Earth's land area and yet consume 75% of global resources and also produce most of the waste. So it's important in particular that cities and urban areas are designed to be sustainable. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the United Nations clearly believes that sustainability is such an important goal. So much so that in 2015, the United Nations launched the Sustainable Development Goals. Goals for every country to work towards over a 15-year period. And you'll notice that some of these goals focus specifically on cities, such as goal number 11, and other goals focus specifically on being careful with our resources. So the United Nations sees this as a really fundamental global goal and indeed global challenge. Sir David Attenborough is one of my all-time heroes. He's an amazing gentleman, well into his 90s now, and still championing the cause for a sustainable future. I'm sure you're familiar with him, an amazing documentary maker. And earlier this year, he made this very important quote. Surely we all have the responsibility to care for our blue planet. The future of humanity, and indeed all life on Earth, now depends on us. So clearly he believes that we need to be working towards achieving each of those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I would now like to introduce our first panelist for this evening, Derek. And Derek is going to share with us some of his experiences of working in urban planning and how sustainability relates to this field. Thank you, Derek.
Hi, thanks, Jane, and welcome everyone from all around the world. Thanks, Jane, for that wonderful presentation. And I, like to start my presentation really is when I came to Trinity College, I have the aspiration to do the Bachelor of Commerce. But then when I went into one of Jane's subject, which is ED&D, it changes my perspective, and it really given me the motivation to do urban planning. And as you can see, Jane was presenting that, in 2050, there's going to be nearly 70, and some people would say 80% of the entire population will be living in cities. And that really motivated me that, there's going to be a huge demand and importance for, we as future leaders to guide how cities should be developed in a sustainable manner. So today I'm going to share with you guys a few things about what I did study in Melbourne Uni in urban planning, and give you guys like an example of some of the projects that I'm working at the moment and how it relates to sustainability. So if I can just control, yep. So just go with an introduction. Who am I? So I'm Derek. I'm from Penang, Malaysia. It's a small island in Malaysia. And I did study the Bachelor of Environments, majoring in urban design and planning. And I also did a minor in spatial systems. I'm currently a consultant urban planner slash geospatial analyst for an urban planning private consultancy firm in Melbourne. It's called Mesh Planning. And we have 20 people in the team, and really working with extremely and highly talented planners and urban designers for Melbourne. So to begin with, just give you guys a glimpse of what I actually studied in my degree for my entire 3 years. So during my first year, what we actually do is, they get us to write heaps of essays, giving us a big picture of what the built environment industry looks like. And, we do a lot of site visits and reporting, seeing construction sites, how cities are actually being built. There's also a very huge opinion that you will study and learn and hear from your lecturers that private vehicles modes are bad, and you would try to find an argument about why they're bad and what are the transportation modes that are actually sustainable. Well, you also may or may not have a clue or no clue about what you want to do, but you would still try to stay motivated about how can I play a big part in building the cities or the built environment in a sustainable manner. Now in second year, it's a little bit more interesting. In my opinion, I find the second year a little bit more fascinating, because you'll be starting to be introduced with tons of softwares and tools. I would see the second year as more like a year that you'll learn heaps of tools that you can use in your workplace. And one particular thing, if you do urban planning, one thing that you will find yourself doing is called GIS. It's called Geographic Information System. It's basically a computer software that helps you do mapping. And I think this is a very core, important, and fundamental in urban planning, where you do a lot of maps. You make a lot of maps, you make a lot of land use plans, and this is a software that can guide you in making really good plans. So mapping technique was key in my second year. You deal with a diverse range of data sets as an urban planner. You have to deal with census data, you have to deal with all sorts of spatial data that's out there. Yeah, like I said, technical skills, you're starting to develop in the year, you're starting to build your tool set as an urban planner. Now in the third year, you will actually only starting to do urban planning stuff. So in your first year and second year, it's really getting that foundation right, getting the right tool set, getting the right mindset about how urban planning work. And in your final year, you're actually only starting in engaging with like real life experience urban planning topics. And you do a lot of this kind of like land use master plan. You do maybe some 3D stuff, but it's not really required. You might do a lot of analysis. You do some 3D analysis, do some modeling in urban areas. So really urban planning, if you want to compare urban planning and architecture, urban planning looks at the big picture, looks at the big scale from like a 20 to 30 years kind of thing. We look at the large scale, really extremely large scale and long term as well. So there's this thing called precinct structure planning in Melbourne, which I will talk about later. Land surveying, you'll learn that. But here I would like to bring everyone's attention, if you're studying urban planning in Victoria, there's two paradigms of urban planning, and there's the realm of statutory planning and strategic planning. So in statutory planning, you really look at all the regulation and policies of how houses should be built, like, so what's the maximum building height that a house can be built in this particular area. So really, essentially, statutory planning looks at all the regulation and policies. If you're into that, definitely that's the way to go. But strategic planning, it's a little bit more creative and more innovative. If you're the person who likes to do design and making maps and doing analysis, strategic thinking, strategic planning is that realm. And if you want to compare statutory planning and strategic planning, statutory planning is more like short term, like you look at housing development that can happen within a year. But strategic planning is you're actually planning for a city or like a new neighborhood that hasn't even been built. And it could be as long as you're planning your building plans for like the next 15 to 30 years. So, there's one short term and one's long term. But at least in Melbourne Uni, we really focus a lot in strategic planning. So if you ever studied urban planning in Melbourne Uni, you'll be gearing up into the more innovative, more creative, more strategic thinking in the realm of urban planning. So yeah, that's just something to flag. Now it's time to share you guys what are some of the real life projects that you might do, or some of the stuff that I've been doing under mesh planning. And there's this thing called PSP guidelines. So PSP stands for precinct structure plans. So in Victoria, you can't just build a city. There's basically guidelines to plan future neighborhoods. And what mesh has been commissioned by the Victorian Planning Authority and the department, the planning department, the state planning department of Victoria, to basically undertake a review of the old PSP guidelines to new PSP guidelines. And we've been quite fortunate to be commissioned to do these projects. And to just give you an idea of what these guidelines is about, is that these are some of the plans that a precinct structure plan would produce, that to give the neighborhood about how this new neighborhood would be built, where major land uses should be allocated. You can see everything in the beige color. They're all residential. Like we're saying that this is where all residential should go, where the town centers here, at least in purple, where they should be located. So there's a set of guidelines that we write to guide planners or future urban planners in Victoria to plan land uses for existing neighborhoods, but also new neighborhoods. So before I get into a little bit of what the guidelines actually does, is that, going back to how urban planning is related to sustainability. So taking a step back from the guidelines, is that Melbourne, we have a statewide strategic document that entire Melbourne follows. It's called Plan Melbourne 2017 to 2050. So clearly this is a very strategic realm. We look at the big picture, we look at the long-term plan for how Melbourne should continue to grow, where they should grow, how they should grow, more sustainable. And this is like some of the guiding principle in the plan. One thing that really caught our attention as planners is number 5. It says living locally, 20-minute neighborhood. So there's this whole concept that Melbourne is trying to gear towards and I think most of the cities around the world is trying to gear towards to something like a 20-minute neighborhood. Some would argue that 15-minute or 10 minutes neighborhood. But what 20-minute neighborhood really means is that the whole ideology is that you can get to services, jobs, to any places, essential services that you have to go to within 20 minutes, which means you travel to a certain place for 10 minutes and you travel back in 10 minutes. So basically you can get to a certain place and get back to your house within 20 minutes. So we're trying to design a neighborhood that's walkable. Now, this is really interesting because from where you come from, think about how long does it usually take you to travel to your school or to a shopping center or to a health center? Ask yourself how long, and how do you actually, what sort of transportation mode do you actually engage to get to those services? Is it through private cars? Is it through public transport? Is it through walking, cycling? This is something that get you guys to think about. But in Melbourne, what we're trying to get into is that we want to promote or advocate for more active transport, because active transport like walking, cycling, it has a lot of positive health implication on a person's health. So we want to basically design a city that is pedestrian focused and is really pedestrian friendly for people to travel from one place to another place. And these are, if you're seeing here in the image here, it's quite interesting because these are the hallmarks of the 20-minute neighborhood. And these are the stuff that is really guiding us as we plan new cities. These are some of the core principles and core focus of things that we should be planning for. As you can see here, James did show us about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and when you look at all of that, I would say that all of this related back to urban planning, and you can see on the screen how it ties back to the PSB guidelines about how we're linking about some of each different hallmarks of the 20-minute neighborhood, linking to some of the UN SDGs. So just before I end my presentation, so giving an example of what is the current state of the planning in Melbourne, and what the issue that we're actually observing and facing is where we're building cities with really boring subdivision lots. Subdivision means you have this big parcel of land and then you chop into smaller different lots. What we're observing is that there's a lack of diversity in terms of the types of housing that we are actually building, just because of the way we plan cities or the regulation that we have that made some of these easier. That's why developers are more attracted to build this kind of design. You also get to see that there's a lot of spaces given to private cars. You can see that public spaces are very fragmented, they're not connected. You see that the built form, it's all very single story. Again, there's really no diversity, there's no density. So it doesn't really promote a good sense of transportation mode. It's not dense, it's harder. It's like the catchment is really smaller, so it's really boring. But what we're trying to do with the new guidelines is that we want to introduce a little bit more co-living, like where people share spaces. There's more spaces for people to walk. You can see here in light brown, these are basically courtyards that are shared among different landowners, and these are the places where people can hang out. You really want to promote people to come out from the houses and hang out and really have the sense of belonging. We're basically trying to build cities that are belonging and making people having the sense of like being part of a community. And you can see also like how open space here, like they're linked, they're not fragmented. So if they're linked, there's this physical connection as you have in space, like you get to move naturally, they're not fragmented by roads. You can see there's really less space we're giving for roads, and there's more dense built form in this area to promote high density living and more housing diversity options. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say. If you guys have any question, definitely pop up in the screen. But yes, I shall give the stage back to Jane. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Derek. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm really interested in the concept of 20-minute cities, and reflecting on COVID recently and the situation in Melbourne, we've almost been forced to be living in 20-minute neighbourhoods, having been in lockdown for quite a while now, and our movement has been confined to a 15K radius and even smaller in some parts of the lockdown. So it's kind of, to me, that's meant that so many people have been going out and exploring their local area on walking and cycling and getting to know other people in the neighbourhood that they may never have otherwise introduced themselves to. So that's kind of a positive side of COVID, and really a forced 20-minute city idea. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Derek.
No worries.
Sorry, everybody, I meant to say before Derek started, if you have questions for our panelists, Would you mind holding them off until the end of all the panelists have given their presentation, and then we will have time for questions at the end. So questions at the end, if you don't mind, everybody. All right, thank you, Derek. I'd like to now move on to our next guest panelist, Sat, who's going to talk about his experiences in the building and construction industry here in Melbourne. Thank you, Sat.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can, Sat.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Seth. I am originally from Myanmar, also known as Burma. And currently, I'm in Melbourne working as an estimator at Dome Building Projects. We specialize in high-end residential luxury houses as a company. And I am going to talk about the building and construction industry and how it relates to the sustainability. For some reason, I can't seem to move it to the next slide. Great, got it. So back at Melbourne Uni, I studied Bachelor of Environments, which, as Jane mentioned, is now rebranded as Bachelor of Design. And I did double major in architecture and construction. And throughout the 3-year course, these are the things that you've learned, that you've got to learn in pretty much in the order of that you're going to learn. During the first year, you get to learn the fundamentals of the built environment, like how the buildings work and how the construction industry works. And then you also get to learn about the design principles in the architecture subjects, like how to design a building to be functional, how to design a building to be sustainable, etc. And you also get to learn about the history of architecture, both locally in Australia and also globally all around the world, all the way back to the Greek and Rome, etc. And later in the years, especially in third years, you get to things become a little bit more technical, as in you have to learn all the construction technologies, like how to use steel or how to use concrete or how to use timber to achieve certain results, etc. And last but not least is the contract management, which is basically how the building industry operates from the administrative point of view. So construction, what is construction? Construction basically means creating an environment to meet one of the basic needs of human beings, which is shelter. So shelter from the weather, like the rain, sand, snow, or wind, etc. And on top of this, we also consider things like comfort, of how to make a building comfortable to live in. Like when it's very hot outside, we just don't want shelter from the heat. We want it to be cooler than the outside to be more comfortable. And we also consider function of how to make buildings functional for different purposes, like how do we design a house, or how we design a cinema, how we design a school, or how we design a sports center, etc. And we also look into the aesthetic of how to design a building to be aesthetically pleasing or aesthetically harmonious with the environment. But the main focus of the construction industry is, sorry, slides. So the main focus of the construction industry seems to be what we need and what we want, but we are often neglecting how it is affecting the natural environment. So today we're going to have a look at some of the many impacts of our development in the construction industry to the natural environment. And these impacts are related to one another in so many ways. So we have carbon emission, the release of carbon dioxide and other harmful greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Energy consumption, this is bad for the environment, especially when that energy comes from burning like fossil fuel or coals or even wood, etc. And we also have waste production. Construction industry actually contributes a lot to the waste production, most of which ends up as a landfill instead of being recycled. And last but not least, we have water pollution. So how the water that is disposed of from the construction industry affects the natural environment. And there are also many other factors, but these will be the ones that we will be focusing today. So we'll go through some examples of how these negative impacts can be reduced from the construction industry perspective. So the first one would be material procurement, and there are many steps in the material procurement at different stages of the material procurement that we can take action to reduce the negative impacts to the environment. The first step would be the raw materials. So pretty much all the raw materials that are used in the construction industry comes from the nature, like timber, we get it from the forest, bricks, we get it from clay, which is essentially part of the earth, and different types of metal that comes from metal mines all over the world. So the first and very important step would be to sustainably and ethically extract these materials from the natural environment. For example, using plantation timber instead of chopping down the forests that are happening naturally, because these natural forests are home to like many different wild animals, and they're very important part of the natural environment. And the next step we can do is manufacturing. So once these raw materials are extracted, we cannot use them directly in the building. So we have to process them to a stage where they can be used effectively and efficiently in the building. And this is the stage where where we use a lot of water and energy. So by developing new technologies that use less energy and less water, or by using energy that comes from like clean or renewable sources like solar or wind power, we can reduce a lot of these energy and water usage at this stage. And the next stage is packaging. So after these materials are manufactured, we need to transport these materials to the construction site safely and conveniently. And this is an interesting one because the packaging materials are not actually get used in a building. So once the materials are transported to the site, and once they're being delivered, we just get rid of all these packaging materials like the plastic, wrapping, etc. So by collecting, recycling, or just reusing them to package new materials, will be needing less raw materials to produce these packaging materials, thereby reducing the need to extract raw materials from the environment. And the next one I would like to talk about is transportation. So by ordering materials that are not locally produced, we are actually increasing the distance that the materials need to travel from the factory to the site. And the transportation of these materials emit a lot of carbon dioxide, whether be it via the ship or by trucks. They produce a lot of carbon dioxide. So if we can try and purchase materials that are being produced locally, we can reduce this distance, thereby reducing the carbon emission. So everything I've talked about so far happens before the site, like before outside of the actual construction site. But the next step that I would like to talk about actually happens mainly on the construction side, which is waste management. So as I mentioned, construction industry produces a lot of waste, most of which ended up as a landfill instead of being recycled. So the very first step to control this waste production is purchasing the correct quantity. It seems like a very simple and straightforward idea, but it isn't always the case in the construction industry, because for any reason, if we order less materials than we actually need, we will have to wait for a long time for another batch of material to be delivered to site. So most of the builders, we tend to order a little bit more quantities than what we actually need. So if we can try to estimate how much material we would need for a particular project and order the exact quantity for it, we would be reducing the waste that is left and used at the end of a building project. And the next one is reusing, recycling, or reprocessing these materials wherever possible. So when we are building houses, most of the time there's already an existing house on that plot of land, and we have to demolish part or sometimes the entire building to build a new house in that place. So by collecting materials that can be materials from the demolition of the existing house that can possibly be reused in the new building, we will be needing less raw materials again, thereby reducing all those negative impacts that we just discussed in the material procurement process. And even if we cannot reuse the materials that come out of a demolished building directly in the new building, we can always collect them and recycle or reprocess them so that they're fit for purpose to be used somewhere else. And the last one I would like to talk about is the water pollution. So construction sites actually use a lot of water for different purposes, from mixing concrete to washing down the floor or to wash the equipments that are already used. So water disposal is an important one on construction sites, and there are actually two main ways the water is disposed. The first one is disposed through the drainage system, and the water that goes through this system is treated at the water treatment facilities by the government. So we as a construction industry don't have much control over how it is treated, but the government is taking care of that. What we actually have control over is the water that is disposed on site. So construction sites are very often very large, and the water is used at different parts of the project. So it is very difficult to manage all the water to get into the drainage system. So some of the water actually do get disposed of on different parts of the site. And this water is actually dangerous or not good for the environment. For example, if we use the water to wash the paintbrush, paint is actually made of a mixture of chemicals that are not often found in the natural environment. So if these chemicals get washed off into the soil, it is bad for the vegetation and also animals that live in the area. So one way to manage this is to actually have wash stations at different parts of the site and equip those wash stations with like portable filtration systems, so that all of the dangerous chemicals or all the dangerous materials are filtered before the water is disposed into the off to the soil. So yes, this is some of the things we've been doing or we've been trying to implement in the construction industry to minimize our negative impacts to the natural environment. And this is pretty much what you'll be learning if you choose to study construction at the Melbourne University or pretty much every university in Australia. And I've been working in the construction industry, so I've focused my presentation to the things that we're doing in construction. But there are also a lot of things that you can do in terms of sustainability if you choose to study architecture, like how to design a building to be sustainable, or how to design a building to actually use less energy, etc. And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sab. That was a wonderful presentation. I feel that the building and construction industry is getting much better at recycling and reusing materials. An example I can think of is in my most recent office building in the city centre of Melbourne. The timber staircase is actually made from recycled chicken coops that are more than 100 years old. So what a great way of utilising that good quality timber. Thank you so much, Sat. I'd like to now pass it over to our third speaker for this evening, Marika Hall. And Marika is going to share with us her experiences of working in the real estate industry in Japan. Over to you, Marika.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can, Marika.
Great. I'm trying to move my slides, so get that. Great. So thank you very much, Jane, and it's really a pleasure to share my experience with you tonight. So I'll be talking a little bit about, what I studied at uni and the industry I'm in, and briefly introduce some of my projects. So, and of course, focusing on its sustainability. Okay, so just to jump in, before going into the contents, I'll quickly, introduce about myself. So I'm Japanese, as Jane said, and I kind of did like a tour around the world and came back to Japan to work. But so on that through in that journey, I graduated from University of Melbourne, and I graduated from Bachelor of Environments in 2017. And I wanted to kind of first talk about how I ended up studying environment. And I echo with Derek in saying Trinity and E&D, the subject Jane is teaching, was really my gateway to deciding environments as my degree as well. I originally had strong interest in, environmental issues, and I loved nature, but it was really, I initially planned, went to Melbourne to study business. And while I was, deciding on my subjects at Trinity and tested out some of the subjects, I quickly learned my strong interest in and passion in environmental issues and so on. So I took E&D, Environmental Development, and ended up enrolling into Bachelor of Environments as well. So a little bit about what I actually studied at university. I chose a major called Landscape Management, which I believe you can now pursue in Bachelor of Science. And this was a major that integrated my interests the most. So it had general subjects about environmental issues, and it was really great in a way that it gave me interdisciplinary. So it's not science, it's not only arts, it's not only about economics, but very integrated, holistic and understanding of the environmental issues. And it was also a great introduction to economics, politics, and also urban planning, which kind of led me to the industry that I'm currently in. And also another pillar in my study was understanding natural environment, so the science of it. And nowadays, there are a lot of discussions around environmental issues, but a lot of times science is kind of, left to the side. So it was really great to have, actual understanding of the science of these issues as well. And using this scientific understanding, sort of the center of landscape management major was, integrating these scientific understanding with socio-political understanding to present sort of management solutions to these issues. So it was great fun. Had a lot of lab work or field work. So if you're interested in, environmental issues and also in sort of science side of it, I would highly recommend pursuing these kind of, study options at University of Melbourne as well. And after graduating, I went back to Japan to start off my career. And actually I started working for a business development consulting firm for a few years in Tokyo. But as I moved to Fukuoka to be closer to my family, I started to finally work for a Fukuoka-based real estate development company. So it's a local real estate developing company here based in Fukuoka. So what we do at our company, basically we plan, which asset we'll be developing and its details, and choose our contractors, like architectural design firm, or as that's talked about, the construction company, and also work with local governments to fix plans or obtain building permits and so on. So we have a really different areas of work, what we do. Sorry, I'm trying to go to the next slide, but here we go. Okay, so it's about 200 people, and we have projects mainly in Fukuoka, but also around Japan as well. So I want to start with talking about sort of general aspects of my industry and how it relates to sustainability. I would say sustainability issues, and mostly the climate change issue, is making our planning very a little more difficult and complex. So for example, on the top left, we have a photo of flooding that happened in New York in September, you might remember. And we have floods and other extreme weather increasing in number and intensity here in Japan as well. And when planning for new buildings, we have to decide, what to prepare for, but there's no real, one answer to it yet. And there isn't any established guideline around either. So it is definitely making it a lot more complex. And another thing, building operation is said to account for 28% of CO2 emission and 11% for material and construction. So definitely built environments is part of issues we have. But I would argue it can be, and it's becoming part of solution as well. If you're in the industry, you can feel, there's developing pressure from, tenants for office buildings or logistics buildings to use renewable energies, supply renewable energy in our buildings. So I would argue, it's definitely part of the problem, but built environments is definitely an area where we can present new solutions as well. And there's a lot of different things like greening urban environments, or we can also have impacts in mobility. For example, Derek a little bit talk about it, but we can decide how much we give to the car parks in our buildings, or we can offer shared mobilities instead, and so on. And I wanted to kind of briefly touch on social sustainability as well. So in response to pandemic, we have to plan on safety measures in office buildings, and also we are forced to think outside the box when planning office buildings nowadays. So as the definition of workplace is now being reimagined. So environmental sustainability is really is a part of what we do in real estate industry, and there's a lot of areas that relate to social sustainability as well. So just to move on to some of projects I'm currently involved with. So just this is a picture of Fukuoka. Some of you might know, but it's smaller than Tokyo. It's a small city in Japan, and the project I'm mainly involved is part of what is called Tenjin Big Bang. So in Fukuoka, luckily we have really close airport that's really close to our central city. But because of that, we had a strong or quite a strict restriction on the building height. So the city government decided to sort of relax that restriction to promote some of the urban redevelopment, which was, you know, not quite happening. So we could argue, you know, we're trying to introduce economic development in Fukuoka city, but we are trying to do that in, you know, in environmentally sustainable way. So I'm involved in a few urban redevelopment projects in Tenjin, which is a sort of business district in Fukuoka. And one of the most recent project that was this is called Tenjin Business Center, and it was opened just beginning of this month. So it's brand new. And I actually don't have too much to say about environmental sustainability about this particular project, but I wanted to touch on how we sort of quickly integrated a sort of pandemic-proof technologies in this building, things like air purifier or non-contact gates and elevator and so on. So as pandemic happened, we quickly sort of integrated these into our plan. And more directly related to environmental sustainability, the next, this is one of the major projects I'm involved in. And this was actually a public land that was publicly sought for proposals, and we won in a competition. So we are starting to plan, actually, you know, build up our plans for it. And in this project, we propose things like a hackable office, which means handing over the, you know, the floor that tenants renting, kind of half skeleton. In sort of common practices, we kind of have a standard finish and hand it over to our tenants. But then the tenants will have their own interior construction, and they actually like rip off all these, you know, a nice flooring and nice ceiling and so on. So we are saying, rather than doing that, we, you know, hand over half skeleton and to accomplish the low waste in our office buildings. Also, we propose to run this property actually fully carbon neutral. So we are trying to run this building net carbon zero. We luckily have a major local electricity company as a partner and co-investor as well. So we're very excited to, this will be our company's first office buildings to go carbon neutral. So it's really exciting to realize that as well. So on last note, I'd say sustainability is becoming more and more central to real estate development. And if you're interested in real estate industry, especially if you wanted to become involved in planning new real estate properties, I would say having background in environments would give unique lens and advantage in your career, and especially in coming decades. So I think, and the world needs such talents, I would say. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions and hope that was a new, I don't know, new information to you all. Back to Jane.
Thank you, Marika. Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself. I didn't mean to switch to the last slide so quickly. Wonderful presentation. Thank you, Marika. Not only do those buildings look incredible, but they're also obviously super sustainable as well. So I love all the vegetation and the use of glass, and, you know, has multiple purposes in terms of environmental sustainability and aesthetics as well. All right, thank you so much to our three amazing panelists this evening. Wonderful presentations. Gave you a little snippet of how sustainability works in those three different design spheres. Ben, I think we have a few minutes for questions. Is that correct, Ben? Or
Absolutely. And before we take questions, what amazing alumni of Trinity College and the University of Melbourne, who are well on their way to amazing careers in this area that's only going to get bigger and bigger. So thank you very much for sharing your experience, guys. Hang around, because There are lots of students who are wanting to ask questions. So let's go to question and answer now. Students, once again, raise your hand, your virtual hand that is, and we'll select you to put your microphones on. If you would like to put a question to Jane or any of our student panelists. Marika, Derek and Sat, turn your cameras on because there's questions coming your way. Here's a name that comes up every week. He's always an active student. He's a great student from Vietnam. And this is Tu Tao. I'm going to unmute you. Here we go. Allow to talk. Tu Tao, go ahead.
Okay, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tuto. I'm a student from Vietnam, and my question is there any way I can find a breakdown of buildings by its construction type?
Okay, who's going to tackle this question? A breakdown of buildings by Tuto construction type.
What do you actually mean, Tutor, by construction type? Can you give us a little more information, perhaps?
Yeah, it's like in designing shape of a building. Is there any way I can find its breakdown by the building construction type?
Right, I'm not sure whether Sat, would you know anything about that, or Derek or Rico?
No, that's why I'm asking.
Building by construction types, I think it would be a bit difficult to like break down by like particular construction types, because after all, buildings are a combination of different construction types. Like we can have a concrete slab on the ground and then a steel or timber frame above with block walks or bricks. So there's really like no particular building that use one construction type. I think that's what you're trying to say.
I did encounter there was a research done on maybe not construction type but material type. If you want that, I think I did found the link to that research paper. Ben, can I just send the link through the chat?
You sure can, Derek.
Pop
it into the chat.
Yeah.
I might also add to our student here, who's a great student every week. This is a very complex area, Tuto, and Melbourne University leads the way in construction, as we see here with these great students. If it's an area that you really want to dig deep and learn more about, come to Trinity College. You'll get great preparation, get into Melbourne University and learn about all of them is the way to go. But thank you very much. Derek has posted an interesting link there that's on the University of Melbourne, link to the Melbourne University website. Thank you very much, Derek. And thank you, Tu, for your question. We look forward to seeing you next week. We've got lots of other questions waiting. Albert, Johan. Albert, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi there. Yes, I'm just wondering if, for example, a student is interested in, for example, generating energy, by reducing greenhouse gas, and is there any suggestion what to study, what sort of subjects I should take, for example? Actually, I'm already graduated, but for future students to take at Trinity College.
Okay, who wants to tackle this one? What areas of study, if a student is interested in ways to reduce greenhouse gases, what area they would get into? Jane, go ahead.
I guess it was Albert, wasn't it?
Yes.
Albert, there's multiple avenues that you could study that. You might be particularly interested in renewable energy options, for example, and you might study Bachelor of Design, but you could also study environmental engineering as well. Or even electrical engineering also studies the use of renewable energy. There's multiple avenues too. I'm sure you could go through in the Bachelor of Design program. I'm not sure whether Derek or Sat might know a little bit more about that.
In
Are there
terms of
different pathways to study renewable energy?
I feel like a lot of our courses and all the subjects talks about that. But
Yeah.
if you're talking about, Albert, if you're talking about specifically inventing technology to counter carbon emissions, then definitely one of the engineering subjects. But for like urban planning, man, we talk about carbon emissions, reduction of carbon emissions all the time. And at least for the realm of urban planning, the best we could do is write strategies, write strategic plans, and document about how we're going to take action on that. But if you're talking about invention, definitely an engineering subject. But what does the other panels think?
Well, it's a fantastic answer there, and I will go one step further by saying that the University of Melbourne has all areas of engineering and is currently ranked #1 in Australia for electrical engineering. So those renewables that will consequently reduce those greenhouse gases, electrical engineering at Melbourne University is a fantastic option.
But it would also be, can I just
go for
add something else in there? It would also come into building and construction as well, in terms of designing buildings that are energy efficient and water efficient too.
Albert, thank you very much for your question. We've got Jeremy next. Jeremy, go ahead. I've opened your microphone.
Hello, can you hear my voice?
We can.
Okay, my name is Jeremy. I'm from Indonesia. Actually, I'm interested in the 20-minute projects that's implemented, the 20 minutes community project that is implemented in Victoria area. And I would like to ask whether this 20-minute community project model can be carried out in all cities around the world. And what are the challenges that arise following it? And because there will be about 60% of the global population that will live in the city, as we know.
Yeah, a great question, Jeremy. Now, really, really good question. The 20-minute neighborhood is, I think it's a concept that a lot of the cities now have been slowly adapting to it. But I know for the case in London, they're trying to aim for a 15 neighborhood because they might think that 20-minute neighborhood might be too big. They want to reduce that. But at least for Melbourne, what we're aiming for is a 20-minute neighborhood concept. So definitely I'll encourage you to go research about that. It's not just for Melbourne. It's definitely around the world. We're trying to aiming for a walkable. I think the idea here is how do you create a walkable city? Because a lot of the cities now are very dependent on private vehicles. And then that actually lead to a lot of social problems. There's a lead to a lot of health problems, but there's a lot of benefit of a 20-minute neighborhood, and definitely encourage you to research that a little bit further. But in terms of the challenges of how to implement it, there's a lot of challenges, and that's why we created the PSP guidelines about how we can actually plan a city that adopt the 20-minute neighborhood concept. And there's a lot of challenges. Like, it's not just about the document, it's a lot about, in reality, how do you get this idea across to council, to developers, because not a 20-minute neighborhood doesn't mean it might result to a highly profitable development outcome. You can have there's a lot of trade-off. When you're trying to build something sustainable, a developer might not be attracted to that because it might result to lower revenue. So that's some of the challenges of this. The challenges of so there's a group of people that want to earn a lot of money, but there's also another group of people that want to go for this concept, but in terms of revenue or profit, that's not a lot. So there's really that debate in reality. How can you bridge these two together? And I guess that's the real challenge that we are facing, and we're trying to counter that in Melbourne, at least. Hope that answers your question, Jeremy.
And it's something that you're tackling right at the moment, Derek, and that's fantastic. And so Derek here is going to move closer to these solutions for the future. I've got a question here for Marika. It's come in on the chat from Hannah Michelle. And it says, about the Tenjin Big Bang, is it applicable to other countries, do you think, Marika, besides Fukuoka? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think many cities actually have their airports this close. I think Fukuoka is one of the sort of top in the list within like Asian countries as well. And it kind of like, you know, it gave us historically sort of discouraged urban sort of city centers buildings to be redeveloped because they couldn't build higher even if they tried to. So there might be other cities that have similar sort of public restrictions on their development, but I think this was quite unique to Fukuoka City. But I think there's in many cities around the world, there's this kind of, you know, there's a restriction, there's push from public sector, and there's, you know, sort of dialogue between the two sectors to come up with solutions, to come up with this kind of like a new project to encourage urban redevelopment and so on. So I think in general sense, I think there's a similar examples around the world as well.
Fantastic. Students, we've got a time for a few more questions, a few more last questions. Put your hand up now. I've got a question for Jane and the panel. This area of sustainability and sustainable design, sustainable cities. 30 years ago, if you were selecting a bachelor degree, this probably wouldn't have been on the list at all. What kind of job opportunities do you see in the next 5 to 10 years in this space?
Wow, good question, Ben. I think you kind of alluded to it before, that this is an area that's really just opening up continuously all the time and getting bigger and bigger. And there's so many job opportunities directly related to this sphere. And I'm finding that more and more now, universities and employers are demanding graduates that have learned about sustainability in their course. So actually at the University of Melbourne, a number of years ago, we signed, the University of Melbourne signed an international declaration that says that all Melbourne University students will study the concept of sustainability in their course. So, you know, Melbourne University sees this as an area that's fundamentally important. The United Nations clearly sees it as an area that's fundamentally important. So more and more people are talking about green jobs, and the green jobs are the jobs of the future. And really, green jobs, I think, go into every sector. We've just heard about 3 examples here tonight in urban planning, building and construction, and real estate. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. You know, everything we do and practice more and more now should have sustainability at its core. I'm not sure whether I've actually answered.
No, you definitely have. So these students now who are thinking, well, what kind of career, how am I going to develop my career and, pay the bills and be employed in a worthwhile job and enterprise? This is an area that is growing. There are jobs that are going to continue to develop. So a very exciting area for those students who may not have made up their mind yet. We've heard from some great graduates tonight who are well and truly on their way to some fantastic careers. I might also mention the University of Melbourne graduates are currently ranked 8th in the world on the employability ranking that's produced by the QS people, 8th in the world. So if we consider all of the world's universities and the graduates, thousands of them, they graduate every year. Melbourne University graduates are highly employable, and the QS graduate employability ranking tells us that 8th in the world for Melbourne University graduates. The questions have finished. We must have covered all important ground. Any last things, Jane, or our panel, that you'd like to conclude with?
I'd just like to say a thank you once again, a really special thank you to our 3 guest panelists, Derek, Sat and Marika, who have been so generous in giving up their time. They're all people that work full time. Marika had to race home from work tonight to get online. So it's a very long day for all 3 of our guest panelists. I'm so grateful for you coming tonight and giving such wonderful presentations. So cannot thank you guys enough. You are amazing. And this is just typical of the amazing students that we have coming through Trinity College and the University of Melbourne. Thank you guys so much.
Fantastic.
Ben,
Thank
for
you.
the
Jane. Thanks.
Thank
Yes,
you very much.
I'll echo those comments, Jane. We've had hundreds of students on online tonight watching. I think every one of them asked a question in the Q&A. I have been typing furiously like a little mouse in a wheel. So this topic really created a lot of interest. I know that there are students out there very keen on it. So I echo your comments, especially about our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for joining and talking about your experience as graduates, not only as students, but as graduates, and showing what great careers can be built around this subject area. Thanks again to all of you and to the audience.
Thank you, James. And thank you, James, as always, behind the scenes, answering those questions. The questions, there were dozens of them tonight, so James has been quite busy. Again, thank you very much, our Trinity College and Melbourne University alumni, students. Do come back and visit us at Trinity sometime. And thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. 520 students joined us from all around the world, from China, from Vietnam, from Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore. We've got students from India, Bangladesh, Myanmar. Satnang, some Myanmar students here would be very proud of your achievements. So this is what it's like at Trinity College, students from all around the world coming to prepare for Australia's #1 ranked university. Next week, we've got another excellent lecture coming up for you. Next week, we have one in a subject that we know as history of ideas. And you'll see the big smile on Derek's face and Marika's and Satnang's. History of ideas is a compulsory subject. It's part of the core. And it's the subject where we teach students the skills of critical thinking, critical and analytical thinking, learning how to understand that the things you learn about at university may have more than one right answer, that you don't just simply copy down and memorize. History of ideas. Next week, you're going to learn about how do we acquire knowledge? How do we know what we know? How do we know what we don't know? Join us next week. That will be a fascinating one. Look forward to seeing you then. And on behalf of Trinity College and our panel, bye for now. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.